Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for today's video, I'm going to be doing the perfect book challenge. I originally saw Merphy from Merphy Napier do this video, and I'll link that video down below. But recently, I stumbled upon Leslie's channel from the Nerdy Narrative, and she also recently did this challenge, and I'll link that video down below. Her video and her choices for her perfect book were what inspired me to make my own video. So basically what the perfect book challenge entails is that there's 10 prompts, and these prompts are all different aspects of books that we all enjoy reading. And for each different prompt, you choose an author that you feel would best suit your perfect book, your hypothetical perfect book. And for me, this was especially difficult because for a lot of these prompts, my top 3 favorite authors of all time, George R.R. Martin, Stephen King, and Brandon Sanderson, they fit most of these prompts. So it was really hard for me just to narrow it down, like which prompt would fit with which author. And there's 10 prompts, and I decided to only do one author per prompt, or one prompt per author. You know what I mean. That way I'm not using the same authors over and over again, and this way you get a little bit more diversity. And of course, this is supposed to be a challenge, so it was definitely a challenge for me. And the authors that I came up with to write this book, even though this is the perfect book challenge, there's no such thing as a perfect book by any means. And this book, I don't know how to describe it. It would be a very weird book if this ever happened. It certainly wouldn't be perfect, but I would for sure go out and buy this book if it were to come true. But anyway, enough of the preamble. Let's jump right into it. So the first prompt is prose, and I'll be honest, prose isn't necessarily a very important aspect of reading for me. When a book does have very nice or pretty prose, or just great prose in general, like that's great, but if it doesn't, and if it just has more of a straightforward writing style, that doesn't bother me at all. So for this one, I wanted to pick an author that has great prose, it's simple yet effective, it's not overly descriptive, but he gets the message across very quickly and very efficiently. And I just think this author is super underrated in general. And for prose, I picked Ray Bradbury. His prose is weirdly, simultaneously poetic, yet very simple. It's elegant, yet it's easy to digest. And the way he describes things in his books and his short stories, you get the feeling that you're picturing exactly what he wants you to picture and nothing more. And while I do enjoy prose from authors such as George R.R. Martin, which can be a little bit more dense and complicated, or even someone like Robin Hobb, who has very beautiful prose, I think for the purposes of this challenge, Ray Bradbury is certainly a great pick for me. The next prompt is world building, and this was for sure one of the easiest picks, and I'm going to go with Brandon Sanderson. There's a lot of things I love about Brandon Sanderson's writing. He's my second favorite author of all time for good reason, and he fits many of the prompts that are in the Perfect Book Challenge. But for me, my favorite aspect of his writing is his world building, especially when it comes to Stormlight Archive in particular. You get the feeling when you read something like Stormlight Archive that Sanderson has planned out every little detail of this world. And even though these books are massive, there's probably so much more information that he's not even giving us, that he is just compiled a world and it just feels so real. And you can just get lost in the worlds that he creates. His characters are great, and that's another reason why you can get lost in them. But for me, his world building is just outstanding, and that's why I picked him for world building. The next prompt is magic systems, and this was definitely the hardest one for me. I know Sanderson would definitely fit the bill for a lot of people for magic systems, but for me, I kind of like softer magic systems, and Sanderson is definitely not about that. And it was hard for me to pick an author, like a fantasy author for this, because a lot of the fantasy books that I read, especially a lot of newer ones, they typically go for harder magic systems where there's a lot of rules and precedents for them. And even though that is cool, I definitely prefer softer magic where it's a bit more mysterious and you're not quite sure what is going on, but it's intriguing. So someone like George R. R. Martin would definitely fit that bill perfectly, but I'm saving him for another category. And this is where it gets weird. Just trust me here. For magic systems, I am gonna go with Haruki Murakami. By no means would I call Haruki Murakami a fantasy author. At best, he's literary magical realism. The magic or just overall supernatural elements to his books can often be very weird, very abrupt, and can go unexplained a lot of the times. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I love his books so much, because they're just so ambiguous and mysterious. And a lot of the times when you read fantasy nowadays, especially modern fantasy, the magic system is completely explained to the point where it almost feels like science. But if I get Haruki Murakami to write the magic in this book, it's going to be weird and it's going to have a lot of unknown factors that you're not going to know what the hell is going on. And I think it's going to be awesome. And this next prompt is exactly what I was saving George R. R. Martin for, and that, of course, would be characters. For anyone who's new to my channel, George R. R. Martin is my favorite author of all time, and one of the biggest reasons why that is because he creates such wonderful characters. And his character work and character development in A Song of Ice and Fire is definitely one of the main reasons why I love the series so much. It's my all-time favorite fantasy series for a reason. But it's not even just because A Song of Ice and Fire. He's written other books as well, and his character development and his character work in those books are just as good. Something like Fever Dream, his vampire novel, has great characters. Tough Voyaging, one of his classic sci-fi books, is great. And then something like Night Flyers, which has a complete cast of characters, and he's just so great with characters. When I first started coming up with authors for this list, hands down, this was the easiest category, because George R. R. Martin just writes my favorite characters, and yeah, that's it. The next prompt is plot, and this took a little bit of thinking, but once I kind of stumbled upon my answer, it was pretty obvious, and I knew I had to go with Sylvain Neville. Sylvain Neville is the author of my all-time favorite trilogy, which is The Themis Files. His plots in his books are so fast-paced, they're so bingeable, they're so addicting, and the main reason why they're good is because he develops very high stakes in his books. Sometimes you can read a book that's fun and enjoyable and very fast-paced, but the stakes aren't quite there. You know your characters are going to come out fine and unscathed, but in his books, there's so much going on in these books, and madness ensues, and there's so much chaos, and you never really know what's going to happen. Man, the plots in these books are just fantastic. So I know if I get Sylvain Neville to actually write the plot of this hypothetical book, that it's going to be crazy, it's going to be fast-paced, and I'm not going to want to put it down. So for plot, I'm going to go with Sylvain Neville. And the next prompt is action or battle scenes. And I'll be honest, when I read books, especially like fantasy books, the main reason why I'm picking them up is for characters and for world building. And a lot of the times, action scenes and battle scenes can be a bit secondary because I'm more interested in the character arcs and seeing how the characters grow throughout the series. But one fantasy author in particular I think does a very good job with action scenes for a few reasons, and I'm going to go with R.F. Kuang. When she writes an action or battle scene, you can clearly picture what's going on and how everything is unfolding. But the main reason why I want to include her for my hypothetical book is that her action and battle scenes always have major consequences, dire consequences. Sometimes when you read fantasy, you can have like a big action scene or battle scene, but all of your main characters come out of it unscathed and, they triumphed and whatever. But with her books in the Poppy War series, there's always just bad crap happening to her characters, and there's always consequences. And I think that's an important aspect to the series in general, not to gloss over the violence of war. She definitely does not glorify violence in any way, and I think that's very important. So definitely R.F. Kuang is going to be writing all my battle scenes. And for humor, this was another pretty easy category, probably the second easiest behind characters, and I'm going to go ahead and go with Scott Lynch. The Gentleman Bastard series is easily one of the best fantasy series I've ever read, and one of the main reasons for that is the humor. Locke and John is just a hilarious duo for me. And Scott Lynch just has terrific dialogue. I'll read you one of my favorite quotes from the book. "I've got kids that enjoy stealing. I've got kids that don't think about stealing one way or another, and I've got kids that just tolerate stealing because they know they've got nothing else to do. But nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever been hungry for it like this boy. If he had a bloody gash across his throat, and a physicier was trying to sew it up, Lamora would steal the needle and thread and die laughing. He steals too much." I don't think I've ever read a series that has made me laugh out loud as much as the Gentleman Bastard series. And for that reason, Scott Lynch, whenever there's a joke or any kind of humorous situation in this hypothetical book, I'm going to leave it up to him. And the next prompt is romance. And I'll be honest, I don't read pretty much any romance. So this was definitely a hard category to choose, not just because I typically don't read romance, but also a lot of my favorite authors are terrible at writing romance. George R.R. Martin, Stephen King, Brandon Sanderson, they're not going to have anything to do with the romance for this book. So my pick for this category is definitely going to be weird, but I think this is just going to be a weird book in general, so I think it makes sense. And I'm going to go with Caroline Kepnes. She is the author of the Joel Goldberg series, and the first book is You, and You is about a psychopathic stalker. So not exactly the healthiest of relationships are going on in this series. But like I said, this book is going to be weird regardless, so we might as well throw some weird taboo stuff in here and just see what happens. So the next prompt is heroes, and originally I had two authors in mind for this category. Sanderson, who has great heroes, especially in Stormlight Archive and Mistborn. And then the other one is Michael J. Sullivan, who wrote Legends of the First Empire, and I've read the first 3 books in that series, and all of those books have great heroes. But like I've said, since this book is going to be a little weirder, I wouldn't think it would make sense to have like typical fantasy heroes that are kind of good just for the sake of being good. So for this category, I'm actually going to go with Andrzej Sapkowski. He's obviously most famous for writing the Witcher series, and one of the main characters in here is Geralt of Rivia. He's one of the main protagonists in the story, and he definitely stands for something, and he has his own set of principles, which is always good for a hero to have. But a lot of the times in the series, he's set up with situations where he has to sort of make interesting decisions, and he's always kind of questioning whether he's doing the right thing or not. And even though, he's the main protagonist of the story, his decisions aren't always spectacular. And a lot of the times it's sort of set up to where, both decisions aren't exactly the best, they don't always lead to the best outcomes. Or he has to make sort of a tough decision where if he does it, it's not great, but ultimately it could lead to something, better or less worse in some cases. And a lot of the times he's not even necessarily doing the things just because of, a set of like, this is right, this is wrong. A lot of the times he's killing these monsters or doing these tasks because he needs to get paid. And the other protagonists in the story, Yennefer, Dandelion, Ciri, they can all be considered heroes as well in one way or another. And I think they're heroes in different aspects of being a hero, if that makes any sense. So even though someone like Sanderson might have been a better pick for this category, I definitely wanted Sanderson for world building. And I think overall Sapkowski, for the purposes of this perfect book challenge, I think it works out pretty well. And for anyone who's seen my videos, they had to have known that this author would have shown up eventually, and I think he works out perfectly for this last prompt, which is villains, and I'm of course going to go with Stephen King. Hiya, Georgie! A lot of the times, the most memorable Stephen King characters are his villains, are his antagonists. And he writes such a wide variety. Y'all go lay down. And he writes such a wide variety of villains. They're so diverse in many ways. Not even just by age. He has young and old antagonists. By gender, he has male and female villains. Just species. Dogs, cats, bears, werewolves, vampires, aliens, otherworldly beings, inanimate objects. You name it, Stephen King will make a villain out of it. So, of course, if I would have anyone write my villains in this hypothetical, made-up story that will never happen, I'm going to go with King. All right, that was a lot of fun. I'm glad I decided to do this. Anyways, what did you guys think of my picks for these prompts? Would you agree with any of these, or would you make any changes? Let me know what authors you would pick for each category and down in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.